So now I'm gonna hook up our ground from our battery over here to our black terminal on our contactor. Now there again, the wire they give you is really way more than I need because I only need about a foot of wire. Another problem I have here is they've put small eyelets on each end, which will work fine on the contactor, but when I go around here to the battery, it takes larger hardware. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna cut that to just the right length I need, and I've got me another heavy duty connector here with a larger eyelet that'll work with our battery hardware. Alright, I've got my little ground cable made up here. Put my little boot over the end, and yeah, you put some heat shrink on the end of the battery terminal in there. Like, I'm sure some of y'all are going like, well, you know, it's going to the negative side. Why'd you put that on there? Like, I just think it looks cool. Okay, so I'm just going to route this around here. And there again, this is going on to the black terminal on our contactor. Our hardware on there. And tighten it up. Put a little booty over it. Okay. I'm just going to run this around. This is just it's going to connect to our negative battery terminal with our regular wiring harness ground. I'm not going to connect it at this time. I'm just going to leave it loose and go ahead and finish connecting our blue and our yellow wire, which will go down to the winch. I'm working on our wires that go from our contactor assembly down here to the winch. And what I've done is I've just kind of temporarily installed it. As you can see here, I've got the blue wire on the blue terminal, yellow wire on the yellow terminal. And I've just kind of taped them up in a couple of places and kind of routed it up where it belongs. The blue wire, what I've done here is I've gone under the contactor assembly and just temporarily attached it to the blue terminal. There's our yellow terminal here. And our yellow wire, as you can see, we've got a little bit more than what we need. Now I could just loop that around like that and go ahead and attach it. And that's fine. But I like my installs to be a little more professional looking. So what I've done is I've made me a little mark on here with some tape. And I'm just going to cut that to length, crimp me a new eyelet on it. And then I'll remove this entire harness and I'm going to wrap the whole thing in electrical tape so it looks a little more professional. And then we'll zip tie all this in place on the frame and attach all the components. Alright, well I've got our wires hooked up to our winch down here, and as you can see I went ahead and wrapped them with electrical tape, but I left a little bit of color on the ends so that you can identify the blue and the yellow so we can get those terminals oriented correctly. Now I just kind of wrapped them up, made a little harness out of it, zip tied it to the frame, ran on up here to the contactor. There you go, left a little bit of color on the ends there again so we could get them coated correctly. So yeah, it looks pretty good. Makes a real neat install. Ain't got a bunch of excess wire running all over the place. Yeah. So next we'll get to working on putting our rocker switches in place, and we'll just about have this project wrapped up. Yeah. All this excitement just wears Booyah plumb out. It's just more than she can handle. Hey! Lazy dog. Now I'm working on where I want to put this receptacle that works with our 15-foot remote cord. And what I'm doing here is this is our front bumper cover here. And what I did is I cut some of the segments out of the little grill portion of it there. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to route the wires down through there and get me some screws and washers. Now I'll mount this to that. Then I'll go ahead and I'll reinstall it back onto the front of the Rhino, and we'll route the wiring around and figure out how we want to hook all that up. Okay, well I've got our grill with our remote receptacle reinstalled. That's turned out pretty good. That's a good looking install right there. I like how neat and clean that looks. And what I did over here on the back side is I used the hardware that came with it, but I had to put some additional washers on there to keep the hardware from pulling through the holes in the grill. But then I just zip tied it to the front bumper, went to the frame, and just kind of followed my winch wires up. And there again, I've got way more wire than I need here, so I'll have to trim that back. And but what I'm going to do before I start doing all that, I've got to put the switch in, the rocker switch that goes in the dash. So I'm going to just leave all this loose for right now, and I'm going to concentrate on putting the switch on the other side of the dash over there, run the wires out for that, then I'll figure out what I need to do to get it all hooked up and routed correctly where it looks good. Now this is the rocker switch assembly that we're going to be mounting in the dash, And as I stated before, it's got a bunch of additional hardware on here for use on ATVs so that you can mount it to the handlebar. But I think I've come up with a good idea on how to place this where it's going to look real good. So I'm just going to take all this hardware off, and I'll go ahead and install the thing, and when I get it installed, I'll show you what I did. Well, I got our rocker switch mounted up here on the dash, and what I did is I went down here on the underside of the dash. There's kind of a flat spot right in there. So I just took all the hardware off of that rocker switch and just ran the screws up from the bottom up through the top, drilled me 2 holes in the dash, and just put nuts and washers on the back side of it. So it's mounted good and solid there. Then I just drilled a hole back behind it, routed the wiring harness up through there. And so now we'll go up front, back around to the contactor, and get all those wires routed and plugged up. Alright, well I pretty much got our pigtails about wired up. This is the end that goes to the rocker switch that's mounted in the dash. And then this pigtail here is the one that goes down to the receptacle that's mounted in the front bumper. So what I did is I just pulled them up here and I cut off about 3 foot of excess wire off of each end of it. And then I just bound them together, soldered them real good, and then put some heat shrink over them. So what that leaves us with is just our last little pigtail here that will connect to the contactor assembly. And I had 2 other wire connections I had to make here. Of course, the rocker switches have to be powered, so that's what this red wire is. This one's going to the one on the dash, this one goes to the one down on the bumper. And so what I did to get power is I ran me just a red wire up, and I ran to this pigtail here, which is a factory pigtail that goes to the 12 volt DC receptacle plug on the dash. And the reason why I like to use this circuit is because it has its own 10 amp fuse. So that way if we have a problem with our rocker switches or anything like that, something shorts out, it can blow that accessory fuse, but everything else on the machine will still run. So now all I got to do is I have one last connection here to make. This is the ground wire for our rocker switch, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to ground it right here to the black terminal on the contactor, and then I'll just wrap all this stuff up. I've got left me a little bit of vinyl here that I just split. Now I'll just tuck all that in there real good, wrap it all up real good, zip tie it up out of the way, and we'll be pretty much done. Now here's a harness after I've got it all wrapped up there. Now this is our red power wire that goes over to our 12 volt accessory pigtail. And let's see here, this was the white ground wire that I've got hooked to the ground lug on the contactor. And of course this is the contactor connections itself. All I gotta do is plug those in. Now I'll just tuck all that up under the contactor assembly. I'll zip tie it all together, and then only thing else I need to do is just reconnect the 12 volt accessory, hook up our grounds, and we'll give this thing a try and see how it works. Well, I've got our wiring all finished up, got the battery cover back in place. As you can see, everything's routed and zip tied down. So I think we're ready to give it a try. I'm gonna reach down here and free up the spool. Pull out a little bit of cable, re-engage the spool. Let's see here, turn on the ignition switch. Let's hit the button and see what happens. Yep. So now I'm going to plug in our remote, make sure it works like it's supposed to. Alrighty guys, well, that's going to wrap up our winch install project for a 450 Rhino. It wasn't too hard to do, you know, just kind of take your time. Heck, if this old redneck here can do it, I guarantee you can do it too. Well, as always, appreciate y'all coming by the shop. Stop back by anytime, you never know what we're going to be working on next. Also, be sure to leave me some comments down in the comment section below. Alrighty, well, as always guys, appreciate y'all watching. Y'all have a good one. Catch y'all next time around. Boo, you ready to go? Let's go.